Imagine this. You wake up in a quiet room, lit only by the gray light seeping through heavy curtains. There's no clock ticking, no morning sun spilling across your face, just a stillness, a heavy, humming stillness that seems to wrap itself around your chest. You stretch, instinctively reach for your phone, but it's not there. You try to recall the time, the date, even your name, and though they eventually arrive, they feel like borrowed memories, half familiar and strangely distant. You sit up, but your body resists, not with pain, not with exhaustion, but with something else, something less definable. A thick fog coils in your mind. Thoughts scatter like leaves in wind. There's a dull ache beneath your ribs, not physical, but existential. The day ahead appears like a vast, flat desert. No landmarks, no trail, just an overwhelming sense that you should be somewhere else, doing something more, being someone different. And yet, you do nothing. You scroll, you drift, you snack. You start things you don't finish. You imagine big plans only to watch them dissolve in the warm waters of procrastination. Now you call yourself lazy. Others might too. Maybe they've said it out loud. Maybe you've just heard it in the silence between conversations. But deep down, you suspect there is something else. Something more insidious than laziness. Something hidden beneath the surface. Because how can someone desperate to feel alive keep sleepwalking through their own life? You remember moments of fire, brief, brilliant flashes when everything felt clear, when you were burning with purpose, alive with ideas driven by something sacred. But those moments passed, didn't they? Like dreams slipping away in morning light. And now you wonder, was that version of you the illusion, or is this one the lie? Here's the paradox. You're not lacking energy when it comes to distractions. You can binge watch an entire series in a weekend, spend hours falling into Wikipedia rabbit holes, stay up till 3 a.m. scrolling through strangers' lives. It's not about energy. It's about direction. And maybe, just maybe, what you've been calling laziness is something more like disorientation. Not weak, just lost. Not indifferent, just fog-bound. What if your so-called lack of motivation is actually a sophisticated psychological defense mechanism? Your subconscious quietly screaming that the path you're on isn't real, isn't true, isn't yours. What if the world has trained you to blame yourself for a disconnection it created? Think about it. You live in an age where every minute is monetized, every breath marketed. You are bombarded by highlight reels, toxic productivity porn, and synthetic dopamine. Hustle culture tells you to push through. Spiritual gurus tell you to raise your vibration, but neither seem to see you. Not the one behind your eyes, watching this slow-motion train wreck of unmet potential and quietly mourning what could have been. You've told yourself, I just need more discipline. I have to stop being lazy. But that inner voice, the one that once felt fierce and sovereign, has grown weary. Its words no longer spark action, only guilt. You are not at war with yourself. You are at war with a system that hijacked your compass. So, let me ask you something. If you were dropped into a dense fog on an unfamiliar mountain with no map, no stars, and no landmarks, would you call yourself lazy for not sprinting? Of course not. You'd tread carefully, you'd slow down, you'd conserve energy, you'd wait for clarity. In the absence of vision, hesitation isn't weakness, it's wisdom. But the fog doesn't always look like fog. Sometimes it looks like boredom, sometimes like fatigue, sometimes like the crushing feeling that nothing matters and everything is too much. And sometimes it wears the mask of laziness. Now ask yourself this: what if your so-called laziness is not a flaw, but a clue? What if the very thing you're ashamed of is trying to tell you something? What if you're not broken, but being broken open? What if the fog isn't your enemy, but your teacher? Somewhere within you, a deeper question is forming, one you perhaps never dared to ask aloud. What if I'm not lazy? What if I'm just lost and no one ever taught me how to find my way back? Hold that thought, because we're about to descend deeper into the roots of this fog, into the hidden architecture of the self, where ancient patterns, forgotten traumas, and cultural illusions entwine like ivy around your will. And once you see it clearly, you can never unsee it. The fog has a shape. The fog has a name. And it's time to uncover it. There is a lie embedded in the fabric of modern life. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It doesn't strike, it seeps. It tells you that your worth is tied to your productivity, that your identity is a checklist, and that any pause, hesitation, or quiet question is weakness. You've internalized this lie without realizing it, like carbon monoxide in a sealed room, silent, odorless, deadly, and the name it wears in your mind? Laziness. But beneath that word, something older breathes. To understand the fog you are lost in, we must go back, not just through your personal history, but through the collective mind of civilization. We must visit the ancient architects of meaning and the modern engineers of despair. Carl Jung once wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." But what happens when you can't avoid it? When the fog settles in and all distractions fade, what remains is the quiet ache of disconnection from yourself, from purpose, from being. This ache is not laziness. It is a symptom, a red light blinking on the dashboard of the soul. The world is not designed for introspection. It is designed for consumption. The fog is not just in your mind. It is manufactured, systematized, reinforced. You were not taught to ask, what is meaningful? You were trained to ask, what is efficient? Your schedule is filled. Your notifications endless. Your internal compass shattered. Nietzsche warned us of this. He foresaw the death of intrinsic meaning in a world hollowed out by mechanized progress. In his place, we've built hollow idols, achievement without purpose, action without depth. We chase goals we don't understand, fulfill roles we never chose, and wonder why we collapse, exhausted and numb, beneath the weight of invisible expectations. Is it any surprise, then, that you wake each day with that heavy fog pressing on your chest? When every emotion is pathologized, every quiet moment labeled unproductive, every deviation from the norm diagnosed as disorder, how could you possibly hear the voice of your own becoming? Schopenhauer argued that much of human suffering comes from our insatiable striving, our will always desiring, always dissatisfied. But what if the true suffering now is not in wanting too much, but in not knowing what we want at all? That is the fog, a loss not of willpower, but of direction, not of energy, but of inner vision. Let's go deeper. There's a part of your mind, primitive, ancient, that seeks safety in patterns, predictability, certainty. It evolved to keep you alive in a world of predators and famine, but now it is hijacked by algorithms, corporations, and ideologies that profit from your confusion. Every ping, every scroll, every dopamine spike is a leash pulling your attention away from yourself. You are not lazy, you are overstimulated and underaligned, and still the fog thickens. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre spoke of bad faith, the condition in which we deny our own freedom by living inauthentically, by playing roles dictated by society rather than confronting the radical responsibility of choice. When you say, "I can't get motivated," what you might mean is, "I don't believe I'm allowed to choose something different." You think you're paralyzed by procrastination, but it may be something more terrifying. The quiet realization that you've been climbing a ladder propped against the wrong wall. Let that sink in. There are entire systems, industries, and ideologies that benefit from you never asking, "Is this even the life I want?" And when you finally do ask it, you are met with a terrifying silence, because you've never been given the tools to answer it. This is the root of the fog. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and existential psychologist, said it best. When a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure. And this is what you've been calling laziness, distraction, not apathy, confusion, not idleness. Hunger for something more mislabeled as weakness. And still the voice in your head whispers, "Try harder. Push through. Grind." But grind toward what? Push where? The fog doesn't yield to force. It yields to vision. But you haven't yet learned how to see. Why? Because modern education taught you facts, not wisdom. Social media showed you comparison, not introspection. Even therapy sometimes focused on coping, not confronting the existential vacuum at the core of your being. No one ever taught you how to build a self. No one ever showed you how to find your true orientation in the wild complexity of existence. And so you drift, not because you are lazy, but because no one gave you a map. And worse, they convinced you it was your fault you were lost. Here's the truth, raw and unfiltered. You do not suffer from laziness. You suffer from disconnection. Disconnection from your values, from your instincts, from your inner compass, from the voice inside you that once whispered this way. But you can't hear it anymore, not through the fog of cultural noise, inherited beliefs, and suppressed desires. You cannot move forward not because you are unwilling, but because your soul has forgotten the shape of forward. And perhaps, just perhaps, that's not your fault. But now comes the dangerous part, because once you see the fog for what it is, once you realize your paralysis is not a failure but a signal, you can't go back. You are now standing at the edge of a terrifying possibility that you must stop blaming yourself, that you must stop calling this sacred resistance laziness, and that the real work is not doing more, but unlearning everything that led you here. Are you ready to see the cost of staying asleep? Because now we go deeper, not into psychology or philosophy, but into your life, your missed moments, your numbed emotions, your slowly dimming spark. It's time to face what the fog has been hiding all along. You think the fog only slows you down. You think it just steals your mornings, your ambition, your momentum, but it does more than that, far more. It rewires your reality. Day after day, this quiet numbness shapes the very fabric of your existence. Subtly, invisibly, like a gentle erosion, not violent enough to notice at first, but persistent enough to hollow out mountains. This is the part no one talks about. The way the fog doesn't just block your path, it builds a new world around you, a smaller world, a flatter one. And without realizing it, you begin to live in a shrinking circle where each choice is a little safer, each thought a little quieter, each dream a little more distant. You adapt. That's what humans do. But you don't adapt upward, you adapt downward. You lower your expectations. You stop setting alarms. You stop answering messages. You convince yourself you're just taking it slow, even as the days fold into one another like a deck of forgotten cards. Eventually, you begin to confuse comfort with peace. But comfort without purpose is just a padded cell for the soul. And then you forget what fire feels like. What begins as disconnection becomes detachment. You stop arguing with the fog. You stop resisting. You start to believe maybe you were always like this. Maybe you've always been tired, always been lost, always been small. This is the quiet violence of the unseen consequences. Let's talk about identity, because that's the first thing the fog goes for. You begin to become the things you once thought were temporary. I'm unmotivated. I'm not consistent. I don't finish what I start. These aren't just descriptions. They become declarations, labels. And like all labels, they stick. They burrow into the walls of your self-image until one day you're not just someone who feels stuck. You're someone who is stuck. You wear that identity like an old coat, heavy, familiar. And every time you think about shedding it, the cold wind of doubt reminds you why you put it on in the first place. Now, think about your relationships. The fog isolates you, but it also infects how you connect. You stop reaching out, not because you don't care, but because you don't feel present enough to show up. You feel like a burden, like dead weight, like a version of yourself not worth sharing. So you ghost people, not out of malice, but out of shame, out of a desire to not be seen this way. And yet the longer you remain unseen, the more your inner world feels unreal. Social connection, the very thing that could tether you to reality, begins to feel dangerous. You fear being found out, exposed as lazy, broken, unfixable, and so you build walls, mistaking them for boundaries. The paradox: you crave connection more than ever. You scroll through people's lives like a ghost at a window, watching them laugh, build, love, move. And it's not jealousy you feel, it's grief. A quiet mourning for the version of you that might have lived like that too. And the fog thickens. Cognitively, your brain begins to adapt to this new normal. Motivation becomes a foreign language. Memory begins to blur. Your reward circuitry, once alive with anticipation, starts to go offline. Even the things you once loved feel like chores. Neurochemically, this is no accident. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter of drive and pursuit, begins to misfire, not because you're broken, but because it's been hijacked, rerouted by short-term stimuli, your phone, your feeds, your fears. You become addicted to avoiding discomfort, not because you're weak, but because you've been neurologically trained to equate stillness with safety. But safety without growth is stagnation, and stagnation over time becomes a quiet kind of suffering. The kind that doesn't scream, it whispers. It says, maybe this is all there is. This is where the deepest damage occurs, not in your performance, but in your perception. The fog teaches you not to trust your instincts. It teaches you that dreams are dangerous, that ambition is naive, that effort is futile, so you shrink your goals. You shrink your voice, you shrink your very sense of possible. The longer you stay here, the harder it becomes to imagine another way. Your future collapses inward. Instead of a horizon, you see a loop. A repetitive, predictable loop. Wake, numb, distract, regret, repeat. And still, you are not lazy, you are grieving. Grieving the dissonance between who you are and how you live. Between what you sense within and what the world reflects back. between the magnitude of your soul and the mediocrity of your days. But no one sees this, because the outside world measures only what it can observe: your outputs, your routines, your milestones. It sees the empty inbox, the unread messages, the unfinished projects, and labels you accordingly. But what it doesn't see is the war inside you, the war between the self you perform and the self you repress, the war between the urge to change and the fear of what change might mean, the war between the deep call to become and the deeper fear of being seen failing. This is the consequence of the fog, not just inaction, but disintegration. You don't just lose time, you lose trust in yourself, in your judgment, in your capacity to emerge from the darkness. And the longer it lasts, the more seductive it becomes, because numbness is easier than pain, because drifting feels safer than deciding, because being lost absolves you from choosing a direction. But here's the great tragedy. You're not drifting because you're lazy. You're drifting because your inner compass has been scrambled by noise, by fear, by expectations that never matched your soul. And yet, deep down, under the rubble, something still pulses, a voice that whispers, "This is not all I am," a flicker that resists extinction, a sacred rebellion brewing in the shadows of your silence. Because if this fog is a trap, then surely there must be a way out. You've felt it, haven't you? Those rare moments when the clouds part, when clarity breaks through, even if just for a second, when your body remembers movement, when your spirit remembers flame. Those moments are not accidents. They are reminders, clues, proof that somewhere inside you, the fire never died. You were just told to call it laziness, and now it's time to fight back. Let's imagine the moment it begins, not with a grand speech, not with fireworks, but in silence, a silence so deep it cuts. You are sitting there again, in that same room, on that same chair, eyes glazed over, scrolling through something you won't remember in 5 minutes. The fog is thick, it's pressing against your ribs like a second skin, and then something clicks. Not an epiphany, not an explosion, just a whisper. No more. That's it. That's how rebellion starts. Not with noise, but with clarity. Because once you see the fog for what it is, you cannot unsee it. Once you realize you've been taught to doubt yourself, to suppress your instincts, to obey systems that never had your liberation in mind, something ancient stirs within you, something feral, untamed, real, and you realize the problem was never you. It was the map. You were navigating a world drawn by people who never asked who you were. So now the question becomes, how do you find your way back? You don't, because back doesn't exist. There is no original clarity to return to, no childhood innocence to reclaim. You don't find the path, you build it from scratch, with bleeding hands if necessary. This is the rebellion. It starts when you refuse to play the game of shame, when you hear that voice in your head, you're lazy, you're useless, you're behind. And instead of believing it, you answer it, not with affirmations, but with questions. Whose voice is that? Who benefits from me feeling this way? Is this truth or is this programming? You see, the first step out of the fog is not movement, it's awareness. Radical awareness. You must become a detective of your own mind, a philosopher of your own suffering. You must examine every I should and I have to and ask, says who? You must hold your narratives up to the light and ask, does this belong to me? Or was it handed down like a cage disguised as clothing? You must become dangerous again. Dangerous to apathy. dangerous to expectations, dangerous to the inertia that has defined you. But make no mistake, this isn't about productivity hacks. This isn't about waking up at 5 a.m. or organizing your calendar or 10 ways to beat procrastination. Those are tools for people still trying to survive within the machine. You are trying to escape it. You are not looking to perform better in the cage. You are looking for the key. And that key is meaning. Not motivation, not discipline, meaning. Because when you rediscover something worth suffering for, the fog begins to evaporate. Pain becomes fuel. Time becomes precious. Effort stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like participation in your own becoming. But here's the twist. You cannot wait for meaning to show up. You must create it. Viktor Frankl, standing in the shadow of Auschwitz, understood this better than anyone. He didn't find meaning waiting for him. He infused his suffering with it. He chose to assign purpose where none was offered. And in doing so, he transcended the very conditions designed to annihilate the soul. This is your rebellion, to create meaning where others only see dysfunction. It can begin in the smallest ways. You cook a meal not to eat, but to honor your body. You write a sentence not to be productive, but to reclaim your voice. You walk outside not for exercise, but to remember you are still alive. Each act, no matter how small, becomes an act of resistance, but you will stumble. Often, that's part of it. You will forget. You will fall back into the fog. The difference now is you will know what it is. You will see it for what it is, a trap designed to look like comfort, and you will fight your way out, not alone, never alone, because part of the rebellion is finding others who see the fog too, who name it, who challenge it, who build with you not ladders to climb faster, but foundations to live deeper, and you will begin to construct a new identity, not one based on how much you can produce, but on how fully you can be. This identity will not be clean, it will not be polished, it will not always fit into Instagram quotes or LinkedIn posts. It will be messy, raw, earned, but it will be yours. That's the freedom you've been starving for. Not escape from work or responsibility, but escape from the lie that your value is conditional. From that place, action becomes different. You no longer move to prove yourself. You move to express yourself. You move to become yourself. You begin to do things not because you're finally disciplined, but because you finally care, because you finally see, because something sacred is stirring beneath the ash. Here's the paradox. The more you stop trying to force yourself to function, the more energy returns. Not because you've been fixed, but because you've stopped fighting your own soul. You've exited the war. You've joined the resistance. And the resistance is not glamorous, it's not viral, it's not easy, but it is real. And it starts with a simple decision. I will no longer abandon myself to meet expectations that diminish me. That's it. That's the rebellion. No fireworks, no applause, just a slow, sacred remembering, a reclaiming, a breath, then another, and then something changes. The fog doesn't vanish, but you're no longer afraid of it. You know the way through. You've walked it once. You can walk it again. And every step becomes a declaration. I am not lazy. I am alive, and I will not disappear. You arrive at the edge of it, not the world, not life, not the fog, you. You arrive at the edge of yourself, and you finally ask the question that everything has been pointing toward. Not, what should I do? Or, how do I change? But something far more terrifying. Who am I when no one is watching? And for a moment the noise stops. The guilt, the shame, the constant push to fix and achieve and prove, they fall silent. There's no algorithm here, no audience, no ticking clock. Only you, bare, breathless, brutally honest. You wait for an answer, but none comes. Because here is the truth most people never dare to face. There is no answer waiting in the dark. There is only you waiting to speak. And suddenly you realize, all this time you weren't lost in a fog. You were lost in an identity that was never yours to begin with. You were wearing a costume sewn from expectation, stitched together from childhood wounds, societal scripts, schoolyard shame, corporate hierarchies, curated feeds. And every day you wore it like skin. You looked in the mirror and said, "This is me." But it wasn't. It was a ghost, a stand-in, a cardboard cutout meant to survive, not to live. And now, standing here at the edge of all that is false, you feel something cracking, not breaking down, breaking open. This is the moment when everything starts to make sense. Not because someone gives you the answer, but because you realize you've been asking the wrong questions all along. You were never supposed to be motivated in a system that runs on disconnection. You were never supposed to feel productive in a life that doesn't reflect your soul. You were never supposed to feel on track while following a track that leads away from your truth. You weren't lazy, you were grieving. You weren't broken, you were misaligned. You weren't behind, you were becoming. The ultimate truth is this: you are not a machine that needs fixing. You are a being that needs remembering, and what you are remembering is something deeper than self-help, deeper than mindset shifts, deeper than healing. You are remembering the original you, the wild one, the quiet one, the strange, radiant consciousness that existed before you knew what a calendar was, or a resume, or a GPA. You are remembering that your value was never tied to what you could produce, or how well you could perform, or how perfectly you could meet someone else's expectations. You are remembering that you were born complete, not perfect, but whole, not flawless, but full. And the fog, it was never laziness, it was the soul's protest against a life that had no room for you in it. The fog was sacred resistance, a sacred pause, a signal, a whisper from within that said, "This isn't it. There's more. There's something truer waiting beneath the noise." And now, here you are. You see the fog for what it was, not a failure, but a threshold. Not the end of your willpower, but the beginning of your awakening. Because here's the final paradox: you never lost yourself in the fog. You only lost the ability to hear yourself over the static of everything you were never meant to carry. And now the voice is returning, not as a roar, not as a command, but as a gentle hum, a quiet clarity. It says you don't need to climb. You don't need to chase. You don't need to perform. You only need to listen and build from there. The final truth is that you were never here to prove your worth. You were here to embody it, to live not as a reaction to pressure, but as a response to presence, to move from alignment, not anxiety, to act from devotion, not desperation, to create from wholeness, not hunger, because the fog, as cruel as it felt, was trying to protect you. It was trying to keep you still long enough to finally see yourself, to stop running, to stop performing, to stop abandoning who you were just to be accepted by systems that profit from your confusion. And in that stillness, if you stay long enough, you realize you were never powerless. You were just paused. So now you return, not as the person you were before, but as someone far more dangerous to the status quo, someone who remembers their own name whispered from the inside, Someone who understands that clarity is not something you find someday. It is something you build, one aligned moment at a time. You stop chasing, you start listening, you stop shaming, you start witnessing, you stop asking, how do I become better? And start asking, how do I become more true? And here's the strangest part. When you stop trying to be productive, when you stop trying to force yourself to keep up, when you stop believing that your worth is earned through constant striving, you become unstoppable because now you're not working against yourself. You're working with the deepest parts of you, the creative parts, the quiet parts, the messy, magical, unfinished parts that never stopped believing, even when you did. This is the real you. And now that you've seen them, you cannot go back. You cannot unknow what you've come to understand. That you were never broken. You were buried, and the fog, for all its weight and silence, was just the waiting room for your own becoming. So what now? You move, not with panic, not with pressure, but with presence, one breath at a time, one step at a time. No longer trying to escape the fog, but knowing how to walk through it, with eyes open, with heart steady, and with a voice that says, I am not lazy, I am not lost, I am waking up. And that is enough to begin again, and again, and again, until the life you build is not a performance, but a prayer.